Hey everyone, it's TK Friday, and boy do I have a good one for you today, especially if you like working with Photoshop plugins. The title of today's episode is TK8, Working with Photoshop Plugins. Stay tuned. Hello everyone, and welcome to The Joy of Editing with Dave Kelly. Well, it's TK Friday again, and thank you for joining me. I'm so glad to have you here. Today we'll be working with Photoshop plugins, and I have two different examples to show you how I use the TK8 plugin for Photoshop in conjunction with Photoshop plugins. It's a really powerful way of editing, and I bet a lot of you have never thought to use your TK8 plugin for Photoshop with Photoshop plugins, but today you're going to learn how if you don't already know. If you're new to my channel and you don't already have the TK8 plugin for Photoshop, or if you've been watching for a while and you're deciding that now is the time to get the TK8 plugin for Photoshop, I'll leave a link in the description below where you can get it. And if you'll use my promo code DK15, you'll save 15% off anything on the TK8 website, and that includes training videos as well. I'm going to start out with this image of a rose. I shot this recently with my iPhone 13 Pro Max. Now, I shot this in RAW, and its macro capabilities are really good. But let me take you through my typical Lightroom workflow. As you can see, it's an Apple Pro RAW file. I'm going to go ahead and add a linear profile to it. By the way, you can get linear profiles for your iPhones from Tony, which is a really nice thing. And I'll also have a link in the description below where you can get free linear profiles for your different cameras. After I apply the linear profile, I always like to click Auto. And I have a new little change to my workflow that I'm going to show you here in a second. But the first thing I like to do, I'm not going to touch any of these other controls here, but I'm just going to look and see if I have any clipping. And I have a little bit of clipping in the black, so I'm just going to take my black slider and drag it to the right till that clipping just goes away. And I see that the highlight side is not quite touching the edge, so I'm just going to move it over till I touch that edge, okay? Now here's the change to my workflow. I like to come down here to Tone Curve and make sure you have this first button clicked on. And notice that you have highlights, lights, darks, and shadows. All of these tonal regions are broken down for you, so I find this very helpful in the start of your raw adjustments. And you also have your regular tone curve. If you click right here, you have a standard tone curve where you can put points on it. And of course you have your channels, red, green, and blue. But we're looking at this one, and this is really powerful because what I like to do is adjust my highlights with this. And I'll look at my histogram. You can see I'm starting to clip right there. So I'm just going to adjust those highlights. I don't want them too much, but just do this to taste. And then you can work with your lights. Do you need to darken your lights? Like I may want to darken my lights up a little bit, and then we can go to our dark tones. We can lighten our dark tones, or we can darken them down a little bit. And then we can work with our shadows. We can lighten them or darken them. And I think maybe right around there looks pretty good. So let me toggle this tone curve off. Here is the before and here's the after. Pretty cool. What do you think? Let me know what you think about this in the description below. And then I always like to come down here to lens corrections and make sure I have remove chromatic aberrations checked on, as well as enable profile corrections. And for some reason it's not finding my lens, so I'm just going to come in here to click on Apple and go to model and find my camera, which is a 13 Pro Max, and you know what? It's not in this list. Lightroom was right. My lens is an f1.8, so I think I'm just going to use this 1.5. And then you could come back up to basic, and if you feel you need to make any further adjustments, you can go ahead and do it here, but I think everything looks good. But for this new workflow, I do the tone curve before I start adjusting these other sliders if needed, except for the whites and black point. I go ahead and fix that before I go into the tone curve. I almost forgot detail. In this particular image, I'm going to take the default setting of 50 for sharpening, and I'm not adding any noise reduction because it's pretty noise free, and I'm going to add a painterly effect to it anyway, so it won't really even matter. I don't have to noise reduce this at all. So now we can send it into Photoshop. I'll right click, go to edit in Photoshop 2022, and we will get started. Now here we are in Photoshop. I'm going to go ahead and click this button on the TK8 CX or combo panel, depending which one you're using, just to fill it to screen. Now what I want to do here is send this into Topaz Studio 2 and add a bit of a painterly effect to it. I think I can make this image look sort of like a Georgia O'Keeffe type painting, very simply. Now, you may not have Topaz Studio 2, but it doesn't matter because today's tutorial is teaching you how to use the TK8 plugin for Photoshop with Photoshop plugins. So what I need to do is, I don't want to send my background layer into Topaz Studio 2, so I'm going to make a copy of it. And to do that, it's real simple. On the TK8 CX or combo panel, click this button right here, and it makes a copy of your background. And you can rename it if you want. I'm just going to call it TS2. And now I can come up here to Filter and find Topaz Studio 2 right here and launch it. Or in my case, I programmed an action into this play icon on the TK8 CX panel. I'm going to click it because it's quicker, and I love that. I have a video showing you how to add menu items to your TK8 CX or combo panel. I'll link that at the end of this video, by the way. All I'm going to do in here, and I'm going to do this really quick because this is not a tutorial on using Topaz Studio 2. I'm going to come down. There's a really cool filter here called Impression, and what I'm going to do is just add a painterly effect to this. I'm going to come down here to Texture and click Original, because you can see there's some little white flecks in here, and if I click on Original, they go away. I have a bunch of Topaz Studio 2 tutorials showing you how to make paintings, okay? So I'm just going to add a bit of a painterly effect here. I'm going to bump up the paint opacity so you can really see that paint showing through. Let me try low here. Yeah, you can see a lot of the strokes. I think I'm going to go with medium. I'm going to up the paint volume a little bit. Now, I'm not a real big fan of the way this looks right now, but I want that painterly effect. But I'm going to show you how the TK8 plugin for Photoshop really helps me here, okay? So what I'm going to do next is, well, I decided I'm going to go with that low stroke. Yeah, I think I'm going to go with the low strokes, maybe not quite as much paint opacity. Okay, maybe somewhere right around there, and I'm just going to click Accept, and that'll send me right back into Photoshop. Now, here's where the TK8 plugin comes into play. I want to hide this TS2 layer with the painting on it because I want to base my luminosity mask on this background layer, and here's a really good tip and a trick. Click on this black mask and apply a black mask to this layer, and it hides what you're doing, which is really nice. Then I can come up here to Luminosity Masks, and all I'm going to do is put a Lights 1 luminosity mask on here and click this Apply. And now you'll notice we don't see that strong of a painterly effect. Now, if I disable this mask by clicking this X, you can see how strong that effect is. Isn't that really interesting with the luminosity mask attached? So let's see what it looks like again. Let's check the X with that mask. And isn't that cool? Now, here's something you can do. You can come up here and click this icon. You'll go into layer mask mode. Now, this is like a candy store. You can go ahead and experiment here. We have a Lights 1 mask on here, but if we wanted to tone that down more, we can see what a Lights 2 does. And you notice how that effect is toned back even more. If that's still too strong, let's try a Lights 3. And now that's a Lights 3, so it's toned back even more. I like Lights 2 so far. It's winning. Let's try Darks 1. Nah, I don't like it. It's going in the wrong direction. Let's try a Midtones 1. That's not bad. It's very weak, but let's go to 2. It'll be a little bit stronger, a lot stronger, and I don't like it. Of course, Mids 3 will be even stronger, but I like Lights 2. To me, that's the perfect effect. So we went from here to here with the aid of the TK8 plugin for Photoshop. Pretty cool, right? Now, I want to use another very popular filter on this, a plugin, and that is from the Nik Collection Color Efex Pro 4, and that is Glamour Glow. I know a lot of you out there use Glamour Glow. Now, I need to send this into the Nik Collection. If I send this in right now, I'd have to click on the pixel layer, send it in. It's going to go in with all that entire painterly effect on it, which I don't want. So what I need to do is stamp this layer, okay? In other words, combine all this together in a stamp layer. And to do that, just come to this icon right here, click it, and that stamps the image just the way it is. And now I can send this into Glamour Glow. So I'll come up here to Filter. I don't have that programmed into my CX panel, but I'm going to come here and click on Color Efex Pro 4. That'll launch Color Efex Pro 4. And I'm using Glamour Glow here. Right now it's on Pro Contrast. So I'm going to go to Glamour Glow, which is right here. And again, this is not how to use these filters. And I know a lot of you guys have these out there. And let me know what your favorite filters are that you use with Photoshop, or your favorite plugins, I should say. Let me know. I'd love to hear, like, is it Luminar, and are there certain filters in Luminar you like more than others? Let's get a dialogue going. I'd really love to hear from you. Okay, so I'm just going to add a glow. This is like an Orton effect, so I'm going to add a lot of glow to this. Okay, something like that. A lot of glow, and I may even bring up the saturation just a little tiny bit here. I'm only looking at the darker tones here. Now, I think this effect is way too strong. And of course, you can adjust the warmth of the glow. You can make it warmer or cooler. You can protect highlights and shadows, but I'm going to leave it just the way it is. I have a really nice, strong glow in there. Okay, so if I click compare, you can see here's the before and here's the after. Now, that's way too strong, but we're not done. Let's click OK, and that'll send us back to Photoshop. When I stamped that layer, it made it right here, but then the Nik Collection goes ahead and copies that. So this layer is redundant. I don't need it. So what I'm going to do is click on this layer and click this garbage can and get rid of it. And now we're going to come here to the Glamour Glow, and I want to do the same thing I did before, and that's put a black mask on it to hide it, because I want to base my adjustment off the layer underneath it. Let's get out of the layer mask mode. Or actually, I just thought of this now. I think we can stay in here. Let's stay in layer mask mode, and let's put a darks 1 on this. And you can see the effect is only being applied to the darker areas. That was an epiphany for me. I just discovered that right now. So this is cool. So remember this little trick. I hope I will. Anyway, so there's a darks 1, and if we click the X here, we can see what it looks like without it. That's what it looks like without it, and that's what it looks like with it. It's only applying it to the darker tones. Now, if that's too strong, we could come to a darks 2, and that tones it down a bit. Now let's take a look. If we click this eye, here's the before and here's the after. But see how it's adding a nice little dark glow to all the darker areas of the image. And that's what I'm looking for. Let me go back to a darks 1. Do I like a darks 1 better? I think I do. Here's a before and here's an after. And don't forget the red X. You can disable the mask altogether with this X. So that's without it and that's with it. So it's really toned down that effect, and that's exactly what I want. Now, if you want to ease it off even more, you could take the opacity, and drag it back as well and fine tune it. But let's leave it like that for now. I really like it. And here's my before and after action here. I can see here's where we started, and now we're at this point. So it's looking like that Georgia O'Keeffe look to me anyway, but we're not done. For a finishing effect, I think I'm going to try an action. I'm going to come to the TK actions and try a soft pop action and see what kind of result we get. Okay, so that's looking pretty good. Here is the before and here is the after. And now it really looks like a Georgia O'Keeffe. Now, if it's too strong, you can either pull the fill back a little bit or take the opacity and ease it back. But I'll tell you what, I like it pretty strong for my taste, and I think I'm going to keep it around an 85. So here is the before, and here's the after. And that's nice. Now, I have a little bit of a hot spot up in here that I want to take care of, and we'll use a luminosity mask to do that. So let me get out of layer mask mode now, and let's come up to the luminosity mask, and no, actually, change my mind. Let's come to a zone mask. And let's find this zone right here. Click it, and I think what I'll do is narrow that zone down a little bit. It's okay actually the way it is, but I'll just narrow it down a little bit. I just want these really light areas in here, and we can lighten this up a little bit if we need to, and I think that's good. I'm going to output this to one of my favorite tools in the TK8 plugin for Photoshop, the color grading tool. And all I'm going to do, that's a highlight. I'm going to click on this highlight block, and watch this area right in here. I'm going to pull this back just till that disappears. Okay, here is the before and here's the after. And that's affecting all the real highlights, and I think it helps the overall image. So there's the before. So look right down in here and up in here and here. And when I click this on, it just tones those areas down a bit, and I like it. So here's our overall before and here's our after. But that's working with plugins with the TK8 plugin for Photoshop. Now we're going to go to another example. Here's our next example. This is a spring shot of mine. I've already processed this image and I like it just the way it is. But when you have an image with a very evened out background, it's a good candidate for a texture. And adding textures gives your image a more artistic feel to it. Then let's add a texture. I'll go ahead and duplicate this background layer. Click this icon. I'm going to send this into Topaz Studio 2 again. There's a lot of plugins out there that have textures in them, but I like Topaz Studio 2 for that. And again, I realize you may not have it, but you can use any type of a texturing plugin, or you could add a texture right in Photoshop as well. But I'm going to come up here. Well, I don't have to go there because I have an action. Click right here. It'll launch Topaz Studio 2. And I'll add a real quick texture here. I'll come up to add filter and come down into stylistic and click on texture, and I'm going to come under category, and I have some textures I bought in this category group here called Flypaper Summer Painterly. It's a company called Flypaper Textures, I believe. I'm not sure, but I'm going to use this texture right here. Now, I realize that doesn't look good. Now, there's different blending modes you can use, and then Topaz give you all kind of different adjustments and so on and so forth. You can flip these textures around, but I'm just going to leave it just the way it is because, again, this is about the TK8 plugin and working with plugins, Photoshop plugins. So I have that texture. All I'm going to do is take the opacity and pull it back. I'm not even going to use a blend mode, but blend modes work well with textures. I'm just going to pull it back to somewhere right around here. Now it's adding that texture all over the image and even on the flowers. I don't want it on the flowers, but the TK8 plugin will help us. So let's go ahead and click accept, and we'll send this right back into Photoshop. And there we go. Now I'm going to do that same little trick where I put a black mask on here because I want to base what I do on the background. This time I will come up and choose luminosity mask because I do want to do a calculation. And what I'm going to do is find a mask that'll work. And with my experimentation, I found that a darks one works because I want to keep it off the flowers. And when I go with the darks one, you see how my background is nice and light and my flowers are dark, but I want my flowers a little bit darker. Because remember, in masking, white reveals and black conceals. So I want to keep my flowers as dark as I can get them. To make these flowers even darker, I'm going to use a mask calculation. So let's click on the calculator tool. I'm going to subtract lights 2, I believe it is. Lights 2, yeah, that's really getting a lot of these flowers in here. And I'm going to go ahead and click equals. And now my flowers are really protected, but I want to get that background a little bit lighter so the effect comes through a little bit stronger because it's like a light gray, so I can fix that. I can come up to levels, and what I'll do is take the midtone slider and drag it to the left and lighten up that background, and then I'll take the shadow slider and drag it into the right, make sure my flowers stay nice and dark, and then I can move this over a little bit more just so I can lighten that background, and that's good. And I'm going to go ahead and click the apply. Let's get out of this properties panel. And now you can see my flowers have been protected and I have that nice texture on the background. Here's the before and here's the after. So let's disable this mask by clicking the X. So you can see there's all that texture, but check out how the luminosity mask has protected the flower. Now, if you feel that texture has lost a little bit, because again, this is how strong it really was. So if you'd like to bump up the detail in that texture, I'll show you how to do that using another Photoshop plugin. This time I'll use On1 Effects 2022. Now with this plugin, I don't have to stamp the layer. It just works differently. All these plugins have their own little anomalies that you got to learn, but on this one I don't have to. But to get to this plugin, I come up under File and Automate and click on On1 Effects 2022, and I'll show you what we do in there as soon as it launches. I'm going to come up and click Add Filter, and there's a really great filter for adding some extra detail, and it's this dynamic contrast. So I'm going to click on this, and you can see already here's the before and here's the after, and that looks pretty good. It adds that extra level of detail. I'm going to give it a little bit more, especially in the small detail. I'm going to bump that up, and I'm going to bump up the medium detail. just so it's a little stronger. So here's the before and here's the after. And you notice it's protecting the flower as well. So it's taking that luminosity mask that I made into effect. I'm going to click on Done, and that's going to bring it back into Photoshop. And notice something, it added that same layer mask back onto this image, which is really cool. But however, I think I have too much detail on these branches and I want to tone that down. So I'm going to do something a little different here. I'm going to go ahead and put a black mask on here and base my adjustment on the layer below it. Before I make this new layer mask, let's take a look at the previous layer mask. Now I'm going to click the double arrow so we can see the layer mask, but you can see the branches are light. Now I want these branches to get dark, so I need to make a different type of a mask, and I still need to protect my flowers, okay? So let's go ahead and click the double arrow again and get back to the image. Now I'll come back up to this layer right here, and we'll build our mask. Now remember, I want to protect the branches and the flowers. I can use a different type of mask. Let's come up to Color Masks and click on here. I have a lot of green in this image, okay? So let's click on the green tones here, which will isolate that background rather nicely, and click OK. And as you can see, it's isolated the background and it's protecting my flowers and the branch, but it's kind of on the dark side, but I can refine it. I can come up here and take this circle and drag it more into the greener areas. And when I do that, I'm going to protect my flowers a little bit more. Then I can lighten my mask by dragging this slider to the right. Let's see how far I can go. I could probably go up pretty far. Let's go right to about here. Now I can refine even further, but before I do that, I'm going to go ahead, and these flowers have gotten a little bit light here. So let's go to Mask Calculations. Let's subtract out the flowers again. So let's X out of here, go back to Luminosity Mask. Isn't this mask calculator a great tool? And as I recall from my last mask, Lake 2 was the one I used. And yeah, that isolates those flowers very well. And let's click equals. And now you'll see those flowers are protected. The branches are protected. I want to lighten that background up a little more, so I can use... My favorite tool here is the levels adjustment. It's easy to use. Click on this, and I'm just going to drag the midtone slider to the left and lighten up those midtones. Now my flowers are getting a little bit light, so I'll take the shadow slider and drag it to the right and darken them up a little bit more. Then I can take this highlight slider and drag it to the left to bring that background up a little bit lighter, right about there, and I think that's good. Now let's just output this to a layer mask, and as you'll see, I protected my branches, I protected my flowers. Now that effect's way too strong, but you can see it here. Let's get rid of this properties panel. Now here's the before and here is the after. Now let's disable this mask. So you can see that's what it looks like without the mask, and this is what it looks like with the mask. So pretty nice. But now we can take the opacity slider, and I like to take it the whole way off and then just drag it up slowly and add just that little extra texture in there that I think I need. Now that's 40%. Here's the before and here's the after. And that still may be a little too strong, so I'll back it down to maybe like 34%. Here's before and here's after. But that was a color mask that helped us this time. So I hope you can see how the TK8 plugin for Photoshop can really help you out when you're using Photoshop plugins from, like Luminar, Nik Software, Topaz. It works on denoising, sharpening, whatever, but it is a valuable tool. And don't forget to use it on plugins. Well, there it is, everyone. TK8 working with Photoshop plugins. And don't forget, let me know what kind of plugins you like to use with Photoshop. I'd really love to hear from you. If you enjoyed this tutorial today, please give it a like and share it with your friends. And if you're not yet a subscriber to my channel, please subscribe, click that bell notification icon. Then every time I upload a new tutorial, you'll be notified about it. I want to thank each and every one of you for joining me today in the Joy of Editing with Dave Kelly. I'll see you all right here next time, but until then, happy editing.